Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change a life forever. A simple smile, a warm gesture, or even the price of a cup of coffee might be the very thing that turns fate in our favor. In today's story, we follow the journey of a young waitress who thought she was just helping a stranger. What she didn't know was that her kindness would set her on a path she never imagined, one that began with a cup of coffee and ended with a life-changing surprise. So, sit back, listen closely, and let's begin. The sun hadn't yet climbed over the rooftops when Emily Harper tied her apron and slipped behind the counter of Mel's Diner. It was the kind of place that smelled like fresh coffee and bacon grease even before the doors opened at 6 a.m. The kind of place where the regulars always ordered the same thing, and strangers passing through left behind only the echo of a bell above the door. Emily wasn't new to this routine. At 26, she'd been pouring coffee and balancing plates longer than she cared to admit. Some mornings, the weariness pressed on her shoulders like an extra shift she hadn't signed up for. Rent was late again, her younger brother needed new school shoes, and the second-hand car she relied on coughed and sputtered every time she turned the ignition. Yet when she smiled at customers, no one could tell any of that. Her smile was her armor, and perhaps the only part of her that hadn't been worn thin. She wiped down the counter and lined up chipped ceramic mugs. Outside, the street was just waking up. Newspaper stands rattled open. A city bus hissed to a stop. The diner lights glowed soft yellow, like a beacon for the weary. By the time the clock struck 6:15, the first regulars began trickling in. Mr. O'Donnell from the hardware store ordered his usual stack of pancakes. A pair of construction workers bantered loudly in the corner booth. Emily moved gracefully between them, balancing plates and coffee pots as though her hands were extensions of the job itself. But under her practiced movements, her thoughts drifted. She'd grown up in this town, always dreaming of leaving. Maybe studying nursing, maybe starting her own bakery. But dreams were expensive, and life seemed to have a way of keeping her tethered to this diner, to this town, to the endless shuffle of orders called through the pass window. Still, Emily believed in one thing: kindness. It was the one currency she never seemed to run out of. She made sure Mr. O'Donnell got extra syrup, she remembered the construction workers' favorite brand of hot sauce, and she always crouched down to talk eye level with kids who came in with their parents. Little gestures, but they mattered. Around 7 o'clock, she refilled a sugar jar and glanced at the door as the bell chimed. In walked a man she didn't recognize, tall but hunched, his coat frayed at the sleeves, his shoes scuffed beyond repair. His hair was a tangled gray, and his face carried the deep lines of time. He moved slowly, almost cautiously, as though he wasn't sure if he belonged there. Emily's eyes softened. Others might see just another weary drifter. But she saw something else: loneliness, maybe even hunger. The man slid into a booth by the window, lowering himself with effort. He glanced at the menu but didn't pick it up. His hands, knotted with age, folded together on the table as if waiting. From behind the counter, Emily caught the sideways glances of other customers. A couple of businessmen in pressed suits raised their brows. A waitress at another table whispered under her breath. But Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed a menu, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and walked over. "Morning," she said brightly, setting the cup down. "Fresh pot. Just made." The man looked up, startled, as though surprised anyone had spoken to him. His eyes were pale blue, clouded but searching. Slowly, he nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice gravelly with age. Emily smiled. "Of course. Can I get you anything to eat?" He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the laminated menu and then back to his folded hands. "Just the coffee," he said softly. "That's all today." Emily's heart tugged. She'd seen that look before, the quiet shame of someone counting change in their pocket. She didn't press him, didn't embarrass him with questions. She simply nodded and topped off his cup with a little extra cream. As she walked back toward the counter, her mind whispered what her heart already knew. The man likely couldn't afford more than the coffee. And without thinking much about it, she made a small decision, one that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The diner's rhythm continued as the morning unfolded. Plates clattered, forks scraped, and conversations rose and fell like background music. But at that corner booth by the window, time seemed to move differently. The old man didn't stir much. He cupped the mug in both hands, as though drawing warmth not just from the coffee but from the space itself. His eyes drifted over the diner, taking in the checkered floors, the faded jukebox in the corner, the walls lined with old photos of the town's glory days. He looked like someone who hadn't sat still in a place of comfort for a very long time. Emily noticed these details while she cleared tables. Something about him tugged at her, though she couldn't quite explain why. He wasn't like the regulars, who carried themselves with the confidence of routine. This man seemed out of place. Out of time, even. At one point, a group of young men in button shirts came in, loud with laughter and the smell of expensive cologne. They slid into a booth across the diner, ordering large breakfasts without glancing at the menu. One of them pointed discreetly at the old man and smirked. "Guess the diner's got its mascot," he joked, voice dripping with mockery. Emily's stomach twisted. She hated when people did that, turned someone else's struggle into a punchline. She shot them a firm look as she passed, a silent reminder that this was her diner to protect, at least while she wore the apron. Back at the counter, she saw the old man shift uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't heard the exact words, perhaps, but he'd felt the weight of those glances. His fingers tapped the rim of his mug in a quiet rhythm. Emily picked up a slice of pie from the display case, blueberry with a crumb topping. She walked it over, sliding it onto his table. "On the house," she said gently. The man blinked in surprise. "But I didn't." "Everyone deserves something sweet," Emily interrupted with a smile. "It's a diner rule." For the first time, a faint smile ghosted across his lips. He picked up the fork and took a bite, chewing slowly as though savoring more than just the flavor. Maybe it was the kindness itself he was tasting. From behind the counter, the owner, Mel, raised an eyebrow at Emily. She could almost hear his voice in her head. "Don't go giving away food, Em. We've got bills too." But she shrugged it off. Mel had a good heart, even if he worried too much about margins. She knew he wouldn't scold her outright. Besides, she could always cover the cost herself if needed. The old man stayed quiet, eating his pie bite by bite, sipping his coffee. But his eyes followed Emily when she moved about the diner. Not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but observant, thoughtful. Almost like he was studying her. When she came back to refill his cup, he spoke again. "You're kind," he said simply. His voice was low, almost raspy, but the words carried weight. Emily brushed it off with a shrug. "It's just coffee and pie." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not everyone sees people anymore. But you do." Her smile faltered for a second. Something in the way he said it made her throat tighten. She opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, the bell over the door chimed again. This time, a rush of morning customers streamed in, parents with kids, office workers grabbing quick breakfasts. Emily was swept away into the flow of orders, balancing plates, refilling mugs, answering questions. When she finally turned back toward the window booth, the old man was gone. The plate was clean, the mug empty, and on the edge of the table sat a small crumpled bill, barely enough to cover the coffee. But beneath it, folded carefully, was a note. Emily frowned as she picked it up, tucking the change into her pocket before smoothing out the scrap of paper. In shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you. You'll see me again." Her eyebrows arched. Customers left tips, sometimes notes, but rarely promises. She folded the slip of paper and tucked it into her apron pocket without thinking much more about it. She had no way of knowing that this small, fragile moment, the pie, the coffee, the kindness, had already set something extraordinary into motion. The following morning began much the same way. Emily opened the diner with her usual quiet routine, wiping counters, brewing coffee, setting out napkin holders and menus. The early sunlight painted the checkered floors gold, and for a moment she let herself imagine what life might feel like if every day were this calm. But calm never lasted. Not in a diner. By 6:30, the regulars had shuffled in, and the breakfast rush was in full swing. Orders barked from the kitchen, mugs clinked against saucers, and the air carried a mix of sizzling bacon and chatter. Emily worked with her usual rhythm, balancing trays like second nature. Yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if the old man would return. She hadn't told anyone about the note he'd left, but it lingered in her thoughts. "You'll see me again." And then, almost as if the words had summoned him, the bell over the door chimed. There he was. Same frayed coat, same weary shuffle, same quiet presence. The old man paused at the doorway, scanning the diner as though deciding whether he truly belonged. Then his eyes found Emily, and he gave the faintest nod before sliding into the same window booth as the day before. Her lips curved into a small smile before she even realized it. She poured a fresh mug of coffee and carried it over. "Good morning," she greeted. He accepted the cup with both hands. "Good morning." She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "I never got your name." For a moment, he looked as if he hadn't been asked that in a long time. Finally, he said, "Walter." "Walter," Emily repeated, as though testing the sound. "I'm Emily." Walter gave a small nod, sipping his coffee. He didn't ask for food again. Just the coffee. Emily glanced around the diner, then leaned on the edge of his booth. "Listen, Walter. I don't mean to pry, but I know coffee isn't exactly a full breakfast. How about some toast? Eggs? It's on me." Walter's pale blue eyes flicked up sharply. "On you." She shrugged, pretending it was nothing. "I'll just cover it. Think of it as my way of paying it forward." He studied her for a long moment. She could almost feel the weight of his gaze pressing against her smile, as though he were looking straight past the apron and the practiced cheer to the tired heart beneath. Finally, he said, "Coffee's enough." Emily didn't push further, but when she turned to leave, she slipped into the kitchen and plated 2 slices of buttered toast anyway. She set them down in front of him with a playful grin. "Oops," she said lightly. "Guess the kitchen made extra. Can't let good food go to waste." Walter's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. He picked up the toast and ate slowly, chewing each bite with care. As he ate, Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She'd given away food before, hungry teens, exhausted truckers, even stray dogs who lingered out back. But something about this act felt different, heavier, like the simple exchange of coffee and bread was carrying meaning neither of them had spoken aloud. When Walter finished, he reached for his pocket and pulled out a few coins. Emily placed her hand gently over his. "Don't worry about it," she whispered. His hand stilled under hers. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Then Walter nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone I knew," he said quietly. "Long ago." Emily tilted her head. "Who?" Walter stared into his coffee, as though the answer lay somewhere in the dark liquid. But he didn't reply. Instead, he lifted the mug and drank deeply, ending the conversation. She didn't press him. Some silences, she knew, were sacred. When he left a short while later, he placed another small folded note under the cup. Emily waited until he had gone before opening it. The handwriting was just as shaky as before, the words uneven but clear. Kindness is never wasted. She traced the words with her finger, her heart catching in her throat. She had no idea just how true those words would prove to be. By the time Emily's shift ended that afternoon, her feet ached, and her apron carried the stains of syrup, grease, and too many refilled mugs. She hung it on the hook in the back room, stretched her arms, and checked her phone. 2 missed calls from her landlord. Her stomach sank. Rent had been due 3 days ago, and though she'd scraped together most of it from tips, she was still short by nearly $100. She shoved the phone back into her pocket before the weight of it could crush her mood further. Outside, the spring air was warm, but it didn't lighten her thoughts. She climbed into her rusted sedan, the one she prayed over every morning, and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared reluctantly to life. She let out a breath of relief. On the drive home, she passed the high school where her younger brother, Sam, would be finishing track practice. At 16, he was fast, so fast that his coach had begun hinting at scholarships. Emily smiled at the thought. If Sam could get a full ride to college, maybe he wouldn't have to carry the same burdens she did. She pulled into their small apartment complex and spotted him already waiting on the curb, gym bag slung over his shoulder. He jogged to the car and slid into the passenger seat, grinning. "You should have seen me today," he said breathlessly. "Coach timed me. I shaved off 2 whole seconds from last week." Emily ruffled his sweaty hair. "That's amazing, Sammy. Keep that up and you'll be running past everyone in the state." He laughed, but his eyes flicked to her with quiet concern. "You look tired. Did you eat today?" Emily forced a smile. "Of course I did." It wasn't entirely true. She'd nibbled on toast scraps and a half cup of soup between tables. But she didn't want him worrying. At home, their apartment was as modest as it came. The wallpaper peeled in the kitchen, the ceiling fan in the living room wobbled ominously, and the second-hand couch had springs that poked through if you sat too long. But it was theirs. Emily heated leftover pasta for Sam while she reheated her own coffee from the diner in the microwave. She leaned against the counter, watching him inhale his food, his dreams of college practically glowing around him. That glow made every sacrifice worth it. After dinner, she pulled out the stack of bills on the kitchen table and sighed. Utilities overdue. Car insurance creeping up. Rent looming. She spread them out like a puzzle, trying to decide which could wait, which couldn't. Sam noticed. "I can get a part-time job," he offered quietly. Emily shook her head firmly. "No. School is your job. Running is your job. You're going to get out of here, Sam. You're going to have a chance." He didn't argue, but the silence that followed spoke of a boy who saw more than she wanted him to. Later that night, after Sam had gone to bed, Emily sat by the small kitchen window with a notebook. She used to fill these pages with sketches of cakes and pastries, recipes she dreamed of baking in a shop with her name on the door. But now, the notebook was mostly numbers. Budgets. Scratched-out calculations. Her pen hovered over the page as her mind drifted back to Walter. The way he had looked at her when she'd brought the toast. The way his words had lingered. "You remind me of someone I knew." She shook her head, closing the notebook. It was just coffee and kindness. That was all. Nothing more. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that Walter wasn't just another passerby. There was something in his eyes, something unspoken, that connected to her struggles in a way she couldn't quite name. And though she had no way of knowing it yet, her small kindness toward him would ripple far beyond her tired little apartment and the bills on her kitchen table. It was already beginning to change everything. 3 days passed before Walter came back. Emily hadn't realized how much she was watching the door until the bell finally chimed and she saw him there again. Same coat, same scuffed shoes, same slow, deliberate movements. He looked around the diner briefly before making his way to the familiar booth by the window. Something stirred in her chest. Relief. Curiosity. Maybe both. She grabbed a fresh mug, filled it to the brim, and carried it over. "Morning, Walter," she said with a smile. His pale blue eyes flicked up to hers. "Morning, Emily." This time, he spoke her name without hesitation, as if he'd practiced it in his mind. She set the cup down, then lingered. Toast again? Or maybe pancakes today? Walter shook his head. Just the coffee. Emily frowned but didn't press him. Instead, she busied herself with nearby tables, always keeping one eye on him. He sat quietly, sipping, watching. Not just people watching, studying. When she circled back, Walter spoke. "Why do you work here?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers asked about the pie or the daily special, not her life. She hesitated, then gave the answer she always did. "It pays the bills." Walter tilted his head slightly, as if waiting for more. Emily sighed. "And because it's steady. And because I don't have many other choices right now." He nodded slowly, as though filing the answer away. The next morning, he came again. Same seat. Same order. But this time, when she brought the coffee, he slid a folded newspaper across the table toward her. "I circled something," he said. Curious, Emily opened it. In the classified section, an ad was highlighted, "Part-time assistant needed at community center. Flexible hours. Some baking experience preferred." Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" She stopped herself. She'd never told him about her love for baking. Walter sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. "You should try," he said simply. Emily chuckled nervously. "I don't even have time for a second job." "Sometimes," he said, "time finds us if we're willing to let it." She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or take him seriously. Before she could answer, another table called her over, and she was swept away in orders again. By the time she turned back, Walter was gone, just like always, leaving only a few coins and a note. "Dreams don't die unless you let them." Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded the slip of paper. Who was this man? The following day, he returned yet again. But this time, something different happened. A woman at another table was short a few dollars on her bill. She fumbled through her purse, embarrassed, cheeks flushed red. Before Emily could step in to smooth things over, Walter rose slowly from his booth and shuffled over. He placed a crumpled 20 on the table without saying a word, then returned to his coffee. The woman stared after him, stunned, before whispering her thanks. Walter didn't acknowledge it. He just sipped his drink. Emily approached him later. "That was very kind," she said softly. Walter glanced at her. "Kindness is a mirror. You gave it to me first." Emily's chest tightened. Something about the way he said it felt deliberate. Like he wasn't just talking about coffee or toast. Like he was testing her, step by step. And though she didn't know it yet, each of these small moments, the notes, the newspaper, the gesture toward the woman, were not accidents. They were deliberate. Walter was watching her, measuring her, waiting for something. The old man wasn't just another customer. He was looking for something in her. Something she didn't yet realize she possessed. By now, Walter had become a quiet fixture in the diner. Every morning, same booth by the window, same steaming mug of coffee, same deliberate silence broken only by a word here or there. Emily had grown used to his presence, so much so that her eyes automatically searched for him whenever the door chimed. But not everyone welcomed him. One afternoon, as Emily wiped down the counter, she overheard two waitresses at the far end whispering. "I swear, he just sits there like he owns the place," one muttered. "And Emily keeps giving him free food," the other replied. "If Mel notices, she'll be in trouble. The guy probably doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together." Emily's hands tightened around the rag, but she kept her face neutral. She didn't like gossip, and she liked defending people even less. Walter had done nothing to deserve their scorn. Later, when she carried a tray of pancakes past a table of businessmen, she caught one of them eyeing Walter with a curl of disdain. "Looks like the place is letting vagrants in now," he murmured to his companion. Emily set the plates down a little harder than usual. She wanted to snap at him, but she swallowed it. Defending Walter out loud might only make things worse for him. Still, the whispers spread. Customers who once lingered seemed quicker to leave when Walter was there. Tips shrank on the days he sat at his booth. Even Mel began to raise his brow. He said one slow afternoon, his voice low, "I know you've got a good heart, but we can't be running a charity out of this diner. If he can't pay, he can't sit all day." Emily looked up sharply. "He pays for his coffee." Mel rubbed his temple. "Barely. And half the time, you're covering the rest." Emily wanted to argue, but instead, she just said softly, "He's not hurting anyone." Mel sighed and waved her off, but the message was clear. Patience was running thin. That night, Emily walked home heavy with frustration. How could people not see what she saw? Walter wasn't some burden. He was just human. Lonely, maybe. Tired, certainly. But not worthless. The next morning, Walter came as usual. Emily served him his coffee, and for the first time, she hesitated before sliding the toast across the table. She thought of Mel's warning, the whispers, the shrinking tips. But when Walter looked up at her with those pale blue eyes, something inside her steadied. She set the toast down with a small smile. "Kitchen made extra again," she said lightly. This time, Walter smiled fully. A real one. Brief, but warm. As he ate, Emily noticed a pair of teenagers at the counter snickering, pointing at him. She marched over, her voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem?" The boys froze, muttered something about leaving, and slid off their stools. Walter watched silently, his expression unreadable. When she returned to his booth, he spoke softly. "You defend me, even when it costs you." Emily shrugged. "It's just what's right." Walter sipped his coffee. "Most people don't do what's right if it comes with a cost." She didn't know what to say to that. She only knew that the truth of it lingered in her chest long after her shift ended. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. Customers wondered why she gave the old man so much attention. Co-workers muttered that Emily was too soft-hearted for her own good. Even Sam noticed her weariness when she came home. But Emily didn't falter. She kept bringing Walter his coffee. She kept offering him toast. She kept choosing kindness, even as others questioned her for it. Because deep down, though she couldn't explain it, Emily felt that these small moments mattered. That Walter's presence in her life was more than coincidence. And she was right. Every glance, every word, every note he left behind. They were pieces of something larger, something no one else in that diner could see. Something that was building toward a revelation that would silence every whisper. The morning started like all the others. Emily tied her apron, brewed the first pot of coffee, and watched the diner slowly fill with its usual mix of truckers, office workers, and early risers. And as always, just after 7, the bell chimed and Walter shuffled in. But today felt different. Emily couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Slower, yes, but with a certain quiet resolve. Or maybe it was the way his pale blue eyes seemed sharper, clearer, as if a decision had been made. He sat at his booth by the window, and Emily brought his coffee as she always did. "Morning, Walter." "Morning, Emily." But instead of sipping, he set the cup aside. His hands rested on the table, fingers laced together. He looked at her for a long time, until she felt her smile falter under the weight of his gaze. "Sit with me," he said. Emily blinked. Customers rarely asked her that. But something in his tone, gentle yet commanding, made her slide into the booth across from him without protest. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. "You've been kind to me. More than you know." Emily shrugged lightly. "It was just coffee and toast, Walter." He shook his head. "No, it was more than that. You didn't look at me the way others did. You didn't see an old man with worn shoes and a frayed coat. You saw me." Her chest tightened, but she stayed quiet. Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table. "This is for you." Emily hesitated. "Walter, I can't." "Open it," he insisted. She carefully peeled it open and gasped. Inside was a check. Not for $10. Not for 100. But for 10,000. Her breath caught. This must be a mistake." Walter's lips curved faintly. "It's not a mistake." Her mind scrambled for words. "But why? I don't understand." Walter leaned back in his seat, eyes steady on hers. "Because I'm not who you think I am. I don't just wander from diner to diner, Emily. I built companies. I've owned buildings you've probably walked past 100 times. People call me wealthy. Billionaire, even. But lately, I've been searching for something money can't buy." Emily's mouth went dry. Her voice came out as a whisper. "And what's that?" He studied her, his expression soft. "Goodness. Decency. People who are kind when the world isn't watching." Emily's eyes widened as realization dawned. The coffee. The pie. The toast. The notes. He hadn't just been a lonely old man. He'd been testing her, watching how she treated someone who had nothing to give in return. Tears stung her eyes. "Walter, I didn't do it expecting anything. I just thought." "That's exactly why," he interrupted gently. "You didn't expect anything. And that makes all the difference." Emily stared at the check again, her hands trembling. $10,000. It would cover months of rent, bills, Sam's school supplies, even repairs for her sputtering car. It was more than she'd ever held in her life. But part of her hesitated. I don't know if I can accept this." Walter smiled knowingly. "Then don't think of it as money. Think of it as an investment. In you. In the future you deserve." Her throat tightened. "Why me?" Walter's eyes softened. "Because when the world turned its back, you didn't. You reminded me of someone I once loved dearly. Someone who believed, as you do, that kindness is never wasted." For the first time since she'd known him, Walter reached across the table and gently patted her hand. "Take it, Emily, and promise me one thing." She swallowed hard. "What?" "Promise me you'll keep being the person you already are, even when it gets hard." even when the whispers grow loud. Promise me you'll never stop choosing kindness." Emily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I promise." And in that booth, with sunlight streaming through the window and the din of the diner carrying on around them, everything changed. The waitress who had given away a slice of pie had unknowingly opened the door to a future she never dared dream. The news spread faster than Lily could have ever imagined. By the following week, customers who once ignored her tables now lined up, not just for the food, but to catch a glimpse of the young woman whose kindness had caught the attention of a billionaire. Mr. Hargrove, no longer the ragged old man clutching his cane, but a well-dressed, sharp-eyed figure, stood beside her at a small press gathering outside the diner. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Lily found herself blinking against the brightness, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She had never wanted fame. Attention had always embarrassed her. But standing there with Mr. Hargrove's reassuring hand resting lightly on her shoulder, she realized something important. This moment wasn't just about her. It was about what kindness meant in a world where people often looked away. "Miss Lily," one reporter asked, "when you bought him that coffee, did you have any idea who he was?" Lily shook her head, laughing nervously. "Not at all. I thought he was just a tired old man who needed a warm drink. I wasn't looking for anything in return." Her honesty only seemed to spark more interest. Mr. Hargrove stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the crowd. His voice carried with the calm authority of someone who had built empires but never forgotten how to be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Lily reminded me of something I had forgotten, that wealth means nothing if it isn't used to touch lives. She gave freely without expectation. That single cup of coffee taught me more about humanity than any boardroom ever did." His words struck like lightning, and for the first time in her life, Lily saw her small act reflected in the eyes of strangers: admiration, inspiration, respect. A week later, her life had transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. The small apartment where she had worried about overdue bills was now filled with light, warmth, and fresh hope. With Mr. Hargrove's backing, she had enrolled in a community college business program, pursuing the dream she'd long buried, opening her own cafe. But the most extraordinary gift wasn't the financial support. It was the mentorship. Mr. Hargrove met her every week, guiding her with lessons he had learned over decades of success and failure. He pushed her not to simply dream but to prepare, to work, to believe in her own worth. "You didn't just give me coffee that day," he told her once, smiling across a table scattered with papers and plans. "You gave me a reason to keep believing in people. Now it's my turn to make sure you never stop believing in yourself." Months passed, and Lily's cafe opened on the corner of a quiet street. She named it Second Chances. The walls were painted a warm cream, sunlight poured through the wide windows, and the scent of fresh pastries filled the air. On the very first day, as she watched customers trickle in, some curious, some already loyal, she felt tears sting her eyes. Her life had turned upside down, not because she asked for it, but because she gave when no one else would. And every morning, right on schedule, Mr. Hargrove sat at his favorite corner table, sipping the coffee she brought him herself. No matter how busy she was, she never let anyone else serve him. It was their quiet ritual, a reminder of how everything had begun. One evening, as the cafe lights dimmed and the last customers left, Lily locked the door and leaned against the counter, exhausted but happy. Mr. Hargrove lingered, his cane resting by his chair. "You've done well, Lily," he said softly. She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I just wanted to create a place where people felt seen, where no one would be overlooked the way you almost were." Mr. Hargrove's eyes glistened. "And that, my dear, is worth more than all the money in the world." That night, Lily walked home under the stars, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a dreamer, a builder, and proof that kindness, even in its smallest form, had the power to change lives forever. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a story much larger than herself. Because one cup of coffee had started it all. In the end, it wasn't the coffee that mattered, it was the heart behind the gesture. The waitress gave without expecting anything in return, and life rewarded her in ways she could never have dreamed of. This story reminds us that we never truly know who we're crossing paths with, or how far a little kindness can ripple. Perhaps the person in need today may be the very one holding the key to your tomorrow. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but its rewards are priceless. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like,